I don't know what were your favorite songs when you were growing up as a young Christian? I had two. And the interesting thing to me is which ones they are. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock. I was so drawn to that song as a teenager. I don't know why that was. The other one is I've seen the lightning flashing, heard the thunder roll. What is that one? Yeah. No, never alone. You don't know that song? It's in the old Broadman hymnal. Loved that song very much. Thank you all so much for that. That was beautiful and a blessing to us. I'm going to read from Luke's Gospel. We read last week. We'll read next week from Luke. We'll conclude on Easter Sunday with some of these sermons from Luke. But chapter 12 today, and I begin with verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." Rich toward God. That's the key. As you know, I was blessed to have a younger brother, John. John went home to be with the Lord in January of 2020. All through our journey together, we thought of ourselves as being 2 years and 11 days apart. My mother always said that. That was her way of describing it. She would talk about her children to people. "This is my daughter, Lucy, and here's my two sons. They're just 2 years and 11 days difference between them." And we don't know why she got such a joy out of talking about 2 years and 11 days difference. Some of it, I think, was that John was as big as I was always. He was bigger, actually, as an adult. But I was the older brother. I claimed my 2 years and 11 days, and I made a lot out of it. In those days, our hero was Roy Rogers. Children here will not know Roy Rogers, but Roy and Dale and Gabby, those were big deals in our lives. And I had the Roy Rogers gun and the special hiding place for notes in the gun. And you talk about being committed. I was committed to Roy and the family. I know that Gene Rogers was supposedly the king of the Cowboys before the war. And he went away and Roy took it away from him. I don't think so. I think Roy was always king of the Cowboys. But John and I, we would play Roy Rogers, and the deal is that he always had to be Gabby. Guess who was Roy? I was Roy. One day, though, I said, "You can be Roy. I'm going to be one of the bad guys today. I'm a crook, and you're going to get me." And we were playing and doing something, and I started running away. And as I was running away, I went through a bedroom. I can still see myself onto my parents' bed, going across the bed. And as I got to the other side of the bed and dropped off, I looked up back to see where Roy was. And right at that moment, Roy threw his gun at me and hit me in this right eye. Nearly put it out. It was patched up for a long time. And the doctor said I was very fortunate. I had a little cut that was there. My mother told me through the years, she said, this dry eye droops. And you know why? Because your brother, who was 2 years and 11 days younger than you, threw that gun at you. Man, she fussed at him. Why in the world did you do that? You know better than to throw things, and you shouldn't be throwing your gun at your brother. And his explanation was, and by the way, this has stuck with me throughout my life. I was not so impressed with it then, but as the years have gone on, I have thought about this, and it seems to me that he was expressing something that is so true about life. He said to my mother, he wouldn't die. He said, I kept shooting, and I kept shooting, and he wouldn't die. He always has to be the winner. You see what he heard? What he was hearing in his life was, being 2 years and 11 days younger, and me being the one who claimed what I claimed, frustrated him. He always was feeling like he didn't get the best of it. And by the way, through our lives, that sort of played itself out. John really did struggle with some things along the way, and most of it, I believe, was rooted in his childhood that was somehow caught up in not getting the blessing that he needed and really should have received. All through my life now, what I've found is that there are people everywhere who feel like they have not received their just rewards. Life has not turned out for them as it ought to. There are times in their lives maybe when they're feeling good about themselves, but if you talk to them very long, you will begin to see that they are very disappointed with what's happened to them. Life is not doing what they believe life should do. Maybe today you have that feeling for yourself, and it's like I work hard, I pray, I keep the rules. I'm someone who does all that you're supposed to do in life, but I don't get what I believe I should receive in life. Maybe it's generally that's how you feel, but I think all of us from time to time feel like we've been hurt, been let down. Something went wrong. Somebody left us. Someone who shouldn't have left us. We have dreams and visions about love and how love works itself and how it plays itself out, and then that love comes to a conclusion in some way, and you're feeling like, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? I didn't ask for this, didn't want this. And we're hurt, we're damaged. What do you do? What do you do when life doesn't turn out the way you want it to? What do you do when life doesn't turn out the way you want it to? G. Morgan Campbell was a famous preacher back in the late 19th century, early part of the 20th century, and was a famous preacher. But in 1888, he applied for ministry in the Wesleyan denomination, as it was known. And that year, there were 150 young men who wanted to be pastor preachers. And he passed his denominational doctrinal test. Baptists, by the way, don't do it this way, never have. But they had to study and they had to prove themselves and that they knew enough. And then they had to preach a sermon. And their sermon was judged, and if they thought doctrinally they're sound and we like the sermon, they can be ordained and can be a pastor. He said he went to the pulpit that day, said it was just the most intimidating time because it was a room that would hold 1,000 people. He said there were 50 people who had come, And there were 3 ministers who were sitting down at the front with tablets, taking notes and judging him. I tell you, one of the most intimidating things for me always was preaching class at seminary, because it felt a whole lot like what he was describing. Because you're new, you're young, you're trying to preach, you start trying to preach in front of these people, and every look on every face is like, why did he say that? What did he mean by that? And then when they look down and start writing, he said he found out shortly after this that out of about 150, they rejected 105 of them, and he was one of them. Now, mind you, he's going to become one of the famous expository preachers. And he wrote to his father. Actually, in that day, what he did was he wired his father, and there was one word: rejected. What do you do when you are rejected? What do you do when life doesn't turn out the way that you want it to? I know a young lady named Jessica who was a senior in high school, wanted to be in a particular group, and tried to get in that group and found out that she was blackballed by someone she thought was her good friend, and so she was not accepted into this organization. Have you ever not been accepted by a group of people you wanted to be accepted by? We had that happen in our family with one of our children. It was painful, not only for her, but boy, my anger went through the roof that they did this to my daughter. Well, Jessica got sick over this. She became so depressed about this, and obviously there were struggles in her life that were not identified at that point in time. She became so depressed that her parents made the decision to have her hospitalized for a period of time. Her doctor agreed. They worked with her. She came home, and the pastor of their church sent a group of young people over to visit with her. He said it was just the most awkward conversation that you could ever imagine. Being a pastor, I could imagine how awkward this conversation is with these young people trying to comfort this girl. And as they finished this conversation and were ready to leave, one young kid who was with them, they all stood up, and as they were turning to leave, he went right over to her and he said, "Jessica, God don't blackball nobody, and neither do we." And she said that was a turning point for this girl. And she got stronger and stronger, and her high school year was wonderful, and then on to college, and she did a great job there. What do you do? How do you respond? What is it that we need to understand when life doesn't turn out the way we want it to? I love this passage that we read this morning simply because it speaks to this issue. And throughout my life, I have dealt with this issue. I have dealt with this issue as a minister. As just a human being. I grew up in a family that once had wealth and then lost it. And a father who was trying to be one who recovered some of the significance he thought of his family's heritage. Grew up with a mother who was from a dirt poor family and was abused as a child. And what they wanted always to get ahead, but always we weren't quite there. And so throughout my years of life, from time to time, I have dealt with a feeling of why not? Why can't this happen for me? What Jesus is doing here is talking to his disciples. He's on the road to Jerusalem. Remember this. He is on the way to crucifixion. He is on the way to his death. And on the way, there is an opportunity to teach a group of people. And the beginning of the 12th chapter says there were thousands of people that came and were listening to him. He talked to his disciples. They all were hearing what he was saying. And really what he was talking to them about was not fearing other people who were resisting their faith and their religious expression. He was wanting them also to know, don't worry about what you say of your faith. Go ahead and be what God has created you to be. And while he's doing this teaching out of the crowd, there's this person, faceless, nameless, don't know who this is, My hunch is somebody who's sitting back there and who cries out, "Teacher, I want you to tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus' response was, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter for you?" What this young man was expressing was, I'm getting cheated. Life isn't turning out the way that I want it to turn out, and it's supposed to turn, and it was supposed to turn out that way. If Father is gone and dead and is leaving behind his estate, there's property, there's money, and the law says the older son gets it, but he has to divide appropriately. And what it would say is this young son gets at least 1/3 of what is available. He's getting nothing. For some reason, this older brother decided, 2 years and 11 days difference, he's going to keep it all. He said, "I'm not going to give it. I am going to keep this stuff for myself." And younger brother is feeling wounded and cries out to Jesus. Something I want to say to you this morning, there's several things I want to try to hit right here. One is that when life doesn't work out the way that we think it ought to work out, we need to remember that God may not resolve our immediate dilemma. God may not resolve our immediate dilemma. We can pray, we can ask for, we can look for, but what we're wanting to get may not turn out to be something that God will do in our lives. Jesus' response to this man was, "Who made me arbiter and judge on this situation?" There was laws that said who could do this, and he was officially not one person who could stand between these brothers. Now, maybe if the brother had come and said, "Okay, would you help us with this?" then Jesus could have given them some wisdom and so forth, but that was not Jesus' role. It was not his place to do this. And he's trying to perhaps say, go find a judge. Go find someone who can arbitrate this situation and can help you guys to come to what is right here. Maybe that's what he was saying. It sounds mean to me when I read it on the surface. It's like Jesus says, "I don't have time for you." I'm not so sure. I think what he's expressing is, this is not something that is in my purview. I do believe that is a powerful lesson for us to remember in life. There are just some things that happen that are a part of being human. We get older and we get sick. Every time I have a funeral, or just the other day visiting a week or so ago with Melvin on a Sunday after church, as I talked with him, visited with him, I cannot help but identify with his situation as he was growing old and sick. And the feeling I had was, this is such a good man. Such a good man. Why this? Why this? Have you ever been there? But I think that what God has set up in this world is a world that is supposed to operate according to how He defines it and what the rules are and what the strategies are that for us. And if we choose to live by those things, then things will go our way. But He also has set it up in a way that we need to accept and live with. I tell you, I'm from the beginning, not everybody agrees with me about my interpretation in Genesis on this, but I believe from the beginning we were not going to be permanently a part of this situation here. That God creates us for a reason, and we're helping in the earth to be stewards of the earth. You read Genesis, and that's the role that we have, but there is sin that blocks our ability to do this. And right there in the beginning, people began to die. They begin to fall away. A brother kills a brother. It's that we have something that we're living in that sometimes we don't want to acknowledge that this is just the way it is. This young lady that's been helping me with My therapy, she's from a small town up in Vermont, and I've enjoyed talking with her while she's breaking my knee, pushing down on it. And she's from this small town, and I got to talking to her about this. I said, I'm a city guy. I grew up in cities, and I've lived most of the years in cities. And I said, there's something about people from smaller communities that I really like, and I think it's because they live so close to the earth and they see the cycle of life that happens. There's a kind of reality that they begin to embrace. You live, flowers bloom, they die. The grass blooms, it dies. People are born and things happen along the way, and we die. We don't live here forever. They're just, and by the way, there are injustices that happen. People do things, they break the law. People in their sin will do stuff to us. God will allow us not to experience something because He knows we're not ready for that something, maybe. See, that's another way to look at that. I want this. You're not ready for that. Yes, I am. No, you're not. You cannot expect God to fix your immediate dilemma every time. You just can't. And I hope you can remember that. Second thing I will tell you is this. And that is that we need to be on the lookout. We need to be guarding against what I call the big C. You know what that is? In our day, it'd be cancer. It's covetousness. That's the really big C. What Jesus identifies for these guys is, be careful now. And the words He uses, watch out. Be on your guard for greed that's going to overtake you. What happens in our lives is we see what we don't have and someone has. So we notice this and we notice that and we want that for us. And He says what this does is it feeds this hunger, and that's why, by the way, this is the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, because if you get into this coveting, what it does for you is wind up putting anger, and it knocks down hope in your life, because covetousness, you just can't get enough. And Jesus is wanting them to say, now be careful here. Be on the lookout for this, because it can kill your soul, your spirit, your life. Life does not always work out the way we want it to, not because God did something or can't do something, but this is life, and maybe God is waiting, or whatever is going on here. The point is, I don't understand it, but watch out for your covetousness. I think I told you this story about the pastor at First Methodist Church in Houston. He was talking about when he was very early on in his ministry. He had a very small church, rural church, had a good friend who in 3 years went to 3 different churches. The Methodist bishop assigned him here, there, and there, and said none of those churches were doing good. His church was doing great. They did all kinds of things like fix up the parsonage. They did. He said they expanded the church grew. He was feeling like it's time for me to get my move. And that's how they do it in the Methodist church. He wanted to move. Guess who got the church that he wanted? His friend who had been in 3 different churches that didn't do anything. And he said he became so covetous, so angry, so bitter, his spirit was dying. He couldn't pray. He said, I could pray publicly for events, but I did not have a prayer life. And I had to find my way to my friend to say, forgive me. You don't even know that I'm feeling this, but I need your forgiveness, and I need to tell you I've got to live my life differently. And what happens is you begin to acknowledge, I need to trust God that He can work this out. That's tough, isn't it? I believe this. It's tough. It's tough to say, my brother has taken everything from me. And if you don't have any recourse, what's going to happen to you? I think this man may have had some recourse, that he could have taken care of this. But if you don't, you need to be on the lookout, even if you do have recourse. for covetousness. Third thing I'm going to say is this. When life doesn't work out the way you want it to, don't go around talking to yourself. You're not writing these down, I can tell. But what Jesus does is he turns then to a parable. And what he tells them is, there was this guy who was already rich and decided that he wanted to build this, bigger barns for himself. He wanted to be able to store up more stuff. He wanted to stack up more stuff for his life. And so he starts building. And in this parable, if you were watching closely, 10 times this individual says, I, my, or mine. See, he's carrying on conversation with himself is what he's doing. I think what Jesus is saying is, he needs to be talking to somebody else. I mean, when this is happening in our lives, rather than giving into covetousness, what we need to be doing is asking God what God wants. What is it, God, that I need in my life? I'm not getting what I thought I was going to get. What is it? Let me trust you. Help me to let go into your keeping. I think a way you can help this, by the way, is by praying with other people. I think by carrying on conversations with people, like in support groups, who will also be able to share your feelings. I didn't get into a cancer support group years ago, and I wish I had, because from time to time I find myself wondering about this, what's going on, why I feel the way that I feel, why do I worry sometimes about things, even though the doctor says you're doing great. And I think talking to other people and saying, what is this supposed to be like? What is it that I am to do? How am I to respond in this? Listening to other people, the voice of God comes through often. But you receive it also through prayer, through studying His Word, through coming to worship. Don't go around just talking to yourself. Because if you do, you're not going to resolve this issue. And covetousness very well could take over your heart and life, and you're going to miss the depth of God's love and presence in your life. The very last thing I would tell you is, when life doesn't turn out the way that you want it to, get busy doing what counts most. Doing what really does feed your soul. That brings the wealth of God into your life. What he says is, let's be rich toward God. That's a great line. Rich toward God. In other words, I'm so disappointed. I am hurt. I don't know where this goes, but I'm going to trust God. And what Jesus does then, he begins to talk to them, and we didn't read, but in verses 22 to 34, he repeats something that you find in the Sermon on the Mount, some things about, don't worry about life. Don't go around, wanting to have all the finest clothes. Look at the birds, look at the grass, look at the flowers. Springtime. Yeah, the beauty that's around us, what God supplies, He will supply for you. Jesus is saying, remember these things. Don't set your heart on all of this. He said pagans do that. Don't be afraid, little flock. For you, down in verse 32, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. And what he's saying then in 33 and 34 is, get busy in the kingdom. Sell your possessions. Give to the poor. Provide purses for yourself that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief can come in and no moth can destroy. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. You know what saved me along the way when I would get into these things? I would go visit somebody who needed me. I'd go sit down and talk to folks. And I discovered a lot of things. The one I discovered, there are a lot of problems worse than the ones that I have right then for for sure. And it begins to make me feel silly about what I'm worried about. And I may begin to feel some sense of shame because I am wanting something. And look what you have already. Look what you have. And thank God. And do everything that you can to invest yourself in God's work. That's why I say to folks who go through the toughest of times, when death comes, when great sickness hits their lives, don't pull away from the Lord's church. Don't pull away from what it is that God is asking you to do. Keep investing yourself in the kingdom. And all of these other things will work out. God will show you the road through. Will you get what you're hungry for right now? I don't know. God knows. I don't know. No one really knows. But what we do know is we can trust God. And God will provide what we need. Amen? Amen. Have faith in God. Have faith in God. Let's sing together. Here at the end of our service, give ourselves a chance to tell the Lord how much we trust Him, how much we want to give our lives to Him. We want to live in a way that pleases Him, a way that makes us effective in His kingdom's work. Have faith in God. He's on His throne. Have faith in God. Clark, lead us in some verses. Let's stand together as we sing.
405.